Hello, my name is Maggie Gennardi, and this presentation will be over parental involvement in the classroom. First, let's talk about why I chose parental involvement. I am a third-year teacher, and last year, my second year, I was teaching with a kindergarten first grade split classroom. I had some students that were up to a third grade reading level, and then I had some non-readers. And this was just such a big gap, and I was using research-based interventions and things like that, and my students were still not making gains. And so I got to thinking about what was happening at home and if they were doing homework with their students at home and if the students were being supported at home in the same way they were being supported at school. I think parental involvement is so important. I think it's pertinent for student success. And through the Bellarmine Literacy Project, I have learned how important it is for me as a teacher to make parents feel welcome and to make parents help parents come into the classroom and give them ideas and things to make them more involved. So next, we're going to talk about why teachers assume low-income families are not willing to be involved. And I think a lot of low-income families are misjudged because of people's prior prejudices. I know myself, I have misjudged people, and I have had prejudices about people in the past. Even in my own classroom, I've thought things about parents that were not true. And the truth is, we only see about 20% of what's happening in the child's life. So for us to judge based on what we see 20% of the time, it's just not right. And as I was researching, I came across 4 main prejudices that teachers or people in general have about low-income families. One was impoverished people have weak work ethics and are unmotivated. Another one was that they are linguistically deficient or that they abuse drugs and alcohol. And then the last one was that they do not value education. So the first prejudice I would like to talk about is that impoverished people have weak work ethics and that they're unmotivated. Some research I found was that 83% of children from low-income families have at least one employed parent. Close to 60% have at least one parent who works full-time and year-round, and this came from the National Center for Children in Poverty. So clearly, when we look at families and we see that they're low income and we think, oh, they're low income because they're not trying or they don't have a job and things like that, this shows that they do have jobs. It's just that they have jobs that don't pay enough or things like that. Another thing that came from the Economic Policy Institute was that poor working adults spend more hours working each week than their wealthier counterparts. So our students in wealthy families, not only are they making more money, they have more time to spend with their children to help them with homework and do things and take them places and increase their experiences and their background knowledge and things like that. So not only are low-income families, they don't have the money or resources, they also don't have the time to help their students increase with their education. But from this research, it's very clear that they do care and that they are trying to improve their lives. The next prejudice I want to look at is that impoverished people are linguistically deficient. And it's been shown that linguists have known for decades that all language varieties are highly structured with complex grammatical rules. So some examples of some language varieties would be Black English vernacular or the Appalachian varieties. And I teach at a low-income school that has a high African American poverty or population. It has a high African American population, and a lot of times myself, I have heard students speaking Black English vernacular, and I've corrected them, and I've used my prejudices to judge, like, wow, their parents are at home not teaching them the correct way to speak. But clearly from this, they're learning in a different way that's just as structured as the English that we learn or that we teach in school. So they're not linguistically deficient, they just speak in a different way, and we should, instead of discouraging that, we should celebrate that and be more culturally responsive. The next slide I want to look at is that impoverished people are more likely to be alcohol or drug abusers. And it says, although that drug sales are more visible in poor neighborhoods, drug use is equally distributed across poor, middle, and wealthy communities. And on the contrary, a history of research shows that alcohol abuse is far more prevalent among wealthy people than among poor people. So just by this research alone, I can see that this prejudice is completely false, and that instead of judging parents and saying that, well, they're not doing this because of alcohol and drugs, we should get rid of those prejudices and think of them, even if that was happening, they're still our students. We still need to do what we need to do to improve their success and get parents involved no matter what's happening at home. But clearly, most of the time, what you think is happening is not happening, because even if they're in a high income family, they could be, alcohol and drug use could be a problem just as much. The last point that I want to talk about is that impoverished people do not value education. And some research I found was that low-income parents hold the exact same attitudes about education than wealthy parents do. There was some research I found that low-income parents are less likely to attend school events or volunteer in their children's classrooms. And I think this just shows a problem with how we are approaching involvement. I think that most of the time we are not welcoming parents into the classroom, or we're not giving them opportunities to be involved because of the prejudices that we have. And so instead of having those prejudices and not welcoming parents, we should invite them in, because we know that they want their student to succeed, and they have the exact same attitudes as we do and with that wealthy parents do. So we need to look at it from that perspective and think about it, what we can do to improve the problem instead of just judging things and moving on. The last thing I want to talk about is how we as teachers can create opportunities for families to be involved in their child's education. And I think one really important thing would be to do a parental involvement questionnaire, asking parents and students things like, how would you like to be involved? How are you involved already? What kinds of things are happening in the home? What would you like to do more? How can we help you? Things like that, just to get a starting point for where you're at and where you want to go. Another thing I found was the Fast Start homework program. It's research based from Crosby, and it was a program where you create a lesson to send home for homework with the parents, and it's about a 10 to 15 minute lesson that helps with literacy development. For example, you would give a passage, the students would read it with their parents one day, the next day they might do an activity such as finding rhyming words from the passage. A lot of they recommended using things like poetry, and I think that this would be a really good way. It's a structured way to get parents involved at home that's not hard, it's not time consuming, and it's just an easy way, and it would be the same type of format every week, so the parents would get used to it, and it would be more like a routine thing. But the research from that showed that 70% of students who were using the program for 2 consecutive years increased astronomically. So I think just by that research, it shows that it really works. Some other things that we could do would just to be educating employees about poverty, making involvement accessible to all families, and then teaching with a culturally responsive model, and validating the underprivileged students' experiences and knowledge. In conclusion, I think that teachers should do whatever they can to create a welcoming environment for students and families, especially low-income families, because they do not often have the means to reach out and give support. I think that parents should know that the school is a community and a resource for them just as much as it is for their own children. And here are my references. Thank you so much.